Jen, we've just learned tonight that Defense Secretary Hegseth plans to remove the security detail guarding former Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley.
That's right. Secretary Hegseth has decided on his second day to immediately pull General Milley's security detail, though multiple threats on his life remain. Caroline Leavitt was asked today if the president would take responsibility if anything happened to those whose security he's pulled. The president has said former government officials can't have security forever. Hegseth also ordered a second Milley Army portrait removed from the Army halls and ordered the new acting inspector general to conduct a review board to potentially strip General Milley of a star in retirement for, quote, undermining the chain of command during President Donald Trump's first term. All highly unusual actions.
New Defense Secretary, a.k.a. Fox and Friends weekend host Pete Hegseth's first order of business was to strip retired General Mark Milley of his security detail. Oh, and launch an investigation into his actions that didn't bow to Trump's every demand. Nothing fascist about that, right? But did you notice Trump's answer to whether or not he'd feel responsible for Milley potentially being attacked or killed now that his vengeance has taken hold?
Caroline Leavitt was asked today if the president would take responsibility if anything happened to those whose security he's pulled. The president has said former government officials can't have security forever.
I'd even assume that Trump may even be hoping something happens to the retired general as a result of his authoritarian directives. In case you were wondering what kinds of anti-American moves Mark Milley made to deserve this response, here's the first.
As senior leaders, everything you do will be closely watched. And I am not immune. As many of you saw the result of the photograph of me at Lafayette Square last week, that sparked a national debate about the role of the military in civil society. I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics. As a commissioned, uniformed officer, it was a mistake that I have learned from, and I sincerely hope we all can learn from it. We who wear the cloth of our nation come from the people of our nation, and we must hold dear the principle of an apolitical military that is so deeply rooted in the very essence of our republic. And this is not easy. It takes time and work and effort, but it may be the most important thing each and every one of us does every single day.
So just like his snarling response to Bishop Marianne Edgar Bood about a week ago, who damn near begged him to act like the Christian that he claims to be, Trump has carried a grudge against Milley for apologizing for providing a military presence against American protesters in Lafayette Square. That's because Trump wanted a military presence to pump fear into the citizens of the country. I mean, he is a dictator, and Milley's apology for that mistake set his hair on fire. This is the same protest that Trump asked his defense secretary why they couldn't just shoot protesters at.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
You were his Pentagon chief. The former defense secretary is saying that it is a legitimate fear that the former commander-in-chief, who is seeking to be the commander-in-chief again, would want to seek retribution against someone like General Milley simply because he doesn't like the way that tenure is being reported in books and in articles.
Yeah, and I think simply also because the way Milley conducted himself, which was to offer candid, frank advice. If it wasn't what the president wanted to hear because of what Milley was saying, or he didn't want to hear what I was saying, look, he doesn't like that. He wants to find yes men in his office. And so, yeah, he would do that. It's hard for me to believe I'm saying that as well. I wish I didn't have to say that. But if I didn't have the experience in the Oval Office with President Trump seriously wanting to call back to active duty McChrystal and McRaven to court-martial them, I would be less certain. But unfortunately, it is what it is.
All this information was out there and reported long before Trump campaigned to be the unrestricted authoritarian that he's crafting the government to make room for. He has a bunch of petulant reasons to want Mark Milley to be in danger, like the time he revealed that Trump admitted to losing the 2020 election.
So we're in the Oval and there's a discussion going on. And the president says, I think it could have been Pompeo, but he says words to the effect of, yeah, we lost, we need to let that issue go to the next guy. Meaning President Biden.
Maybe it was the time that he opposed Trump's constant trashing of the military for his own political purposes.
Look, you have a great military, and anyone who says otherwise either never served or wanted to serve
dodge their service or don't know what they're talking about. I can assure you, from private to general, you have an exceptional military that is highly trained, very well led, very well equipped. So every single day we should be thanking the lucky stars that we have young men and women that are willing to answer the call to the colors, because they're out there on freedom's frontier every day, allowing you to be bankers, allowing Americans the right to vote in next week, allowing Americans freedom of speech and the right to protest and so on and so forth. Those rights, the down payment for those rights, the down payment is the blood of American soldiers, and that has been paid for 2.5 centuries. So you have every right to be proud of your soldiers, your sailors, your airmen, and Marines, because they're the ones on a day-to-day basis that are providing the environment for you to enjoy the freedoms that we have.
But what put it over the top was probably that time that he cooled international tensions between the United States and China after Trump's volatile threats had them on edge.
General Mark Milley called his Chinese counterpart before and after the 2020 election and after January 6th to try to avert an armed conflict because he was so worried that President Trump might start a war with China or that China might misinterpret what the president's actions were because of his rhetoric.
So Milley was concerned about two things. One of them was in October of 2020, where U.S. intelligence showed that the Chinese thought that Trump, to try and stay in office, to make himself a hero, may launch an attack on the Chinese. And Milley knew that was not true, and he had built a relationship with his Chinese counterpart, and he called him on the secret line to reassure him. Now, what happens then is that on January 8th, obviously 2 days after January 6th, Milley is again confronting his fears about how the country could spiral and what could happen with China. And he knows that China is watching what's going on. And he gets back on the phone with his counterpart, and the counterpart has all these questions. And it's in the aftermath of that he sits down with commanders at the Pentagon and goes over with them the procedures for how a nuclear weapon can be used. And he makes sure and goes over with them the fact that the president of the United States has to be the person that orders it, and that Milley, in the procedures for this, has to be on the call, and he has to be a part of it. And sort of reading between the lines on what he said, what they say in the book, it basically seems like Milley is afraid that Trump may tell someone to do something, and they may try and move forward with an unlawful order to use one of these weapons.
So Milley calmed down tensions from China and put in a failsafe to keep the apocalyptic president from flying off the handle and potentially launching a nuclear weapon to prove that he's not a pathetic human. It was unprecedented stuff that people would only have a problem with if they love the idea of having what General Milley, Trump's chief of staff, General John Kelly, and General Randy Manner all called a total fascist as president. And now he's proven them all right, as his fascism has begun to be unleashed.
What is President Trump? He's authoritarian. It's nationalistic. It's far right. It's intolerant of dissent. It has a contempt for the rule of law. It requires direct obedience to a powerful leader, and it requires the supremacy of one ethnic group. Well, I just gave you the definition of what fascism is. President Trump is demonstrating the attributes of fascism every single day. So essentially, we have to remember, what does it mean when General Milley called President Trump a fascist? That is right out of the textbook. It is not something where it is political rhetoric. It is exactly what it is.
But certainly, the former president is in the far right area. He's certainly an authoritarian. Admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.